Well, folks, it's a long episode today. You'd better get a snack. Welcome to Map Crow, the RPG art show. My name is Kyle, and today we're building better dungeons. Earlier this summer, I released the Agnostic TTRPG prep method, which helps you gather all of your favorite zines and books and cards and comics and turn that into an idea for an adventure. But let's say you have your idea already and you just want some help turning it into a dungeon or a location-based adventure. That's what we're doing today. Now, step 0 to any RPG design process is to be familiar with which game you are designing for. The dungeon I'm making today is designed for a low-level, old-school fantasy game like Shadow Dark from Kelsey Dion, Errant by Ava Islam, or Knave by Ben Milton. These games are all designed to bring out player creativity in problem-solving in the game, as opposed to really leaning into a powerful spell list or multi-class synergies. I'll also add that I like to run games where the players are going up against intelligent factions, so if you like to run a game where characters are seeking treasure on their own and killing whatever monsters are guarding it, some of the advice here may not apply to that specific style of game. So to start off, I'm writing down the first 2 things I know we need. We need a climactic boss battle, and we need a place to enter the dungeon. I'm just listing things out to conquer that blank page. Everything else in between, well, that's the dungeon, and we're going to spend a lot of time figuring out all the different pathways and rooms on the way between those 2 points. As I've already stated in a previous video, the reverse 5-room dungeon, I like to think of my boss battle first. It just helps solidify the images in my mind and really gets things going. What is all of this building up to? So I have this idea that I want to be fighting this bandit prince at the back of this messed up temple. But he's doing something at this temple. He's not just sitting in the back room waiting for the heroes to burst in and give him what for. He is there specifically to bind a spirit of this temple into his service. And this gives our adventure a really handy excuse for what the boss is doing in the back of the temple. He's busy with stuff. He's got rituals and incantations to recite. It also adds an important spice to this adventure, a sense of urgency, a ticking clock. Can we stop the ritual in time, or will the bandit prince complete his grim task and become even more dangerous? So if there's some powerful spirit that resides in this temple, maybe this temple is a tomb of one of the paladin kings. This is a great opportunity for us to pour in some of the lore, some of our ideas for the backstory of our game and our setting, and make that history come alive by making the backstory an interactive space. For location-based adventures, it's a wonderful idea to activate the history with a current conflict. This isn't just some generic ruin. This is a place that has a purpose that perhaps has long been neglected, but now finds itself a theater of evil schemes. Now let's think of the minions, the foot soldiers and mini-bosses that we might find along the way. Let's say that they are, beastmen bandits that find themselves under the magical command of the bandit prince. Next, I'm going to list out some of the possible denizens of the dungeon. What are the things that dwelt here long before the machinations of the bandit prince and his beastmen arrived? Skeletons and ghosts seem like an obvious choice, so I'm writing it down. If it helps, we can think about the minions of the bandit prince and the denizens of the dungeon as 2 micro-factions that are pushing and pulling against each other to make it seem like there is a story, whether the party is here or not. And next, I'm going to add another kind of conflict to this location, which is the conflict of nature and time, the toll, the scars that have been wrought upon this place in its time of long slumber. Have mushrooms and moss blanketed the rooms? Has there been some kind of earthquake or landslide? I have this idea that there is this series of waterfalls and springs that are nearby and have kind of carved small paths eroding away through the walls and the floors of this ancient tomb. The introduction of water and river and erosions suggests some things that we can do to add variety to the layout and rooms of this dungeon, as well as introduce some skill and navigation challenges to it. In some ways, you can think of nature itself as a kind of faction that is also acting with its own agenda in this place, albeit over a longer timescale. Now we turn our attention to the rooms and chambers and the layout of this temple, of this tomb. I'm thinking at the beginning we see a baptismal font for kinds of ceremonies that would have been held here in times past, and then we can have like a hall of statues that kind of hint at the long history of this place, and then the final boss encounter will happen in the burial chamber at the rear of the temple. As it stands right now, this is a linear obstacle course where you start at the front door and just walk through rooms till you get to the back door. It's a perfectly fine way to run a dungeon, especially if you've had all other kinds of role-playing stuff happening earlier on in the session, but if you want your entire adventure to happen in this location, you're going to want to vary up the navigation of this space a little bit. I have a whole video about how to complicate the space of a dungeon through a technique called jaquazing the dungeon, and I will have a link to that in the description below. But to simply restate it now, we will be adding multiple entrances, looping paths through the dungeon, and secret paths, and that will do most of what we're looking to accomplish to make this a tad more interesting. I then have this notion for an antechamber that is full of notes and supplies from this wizard that is helping the bandit prince summon and bind this spirit. Perhaps this wizard can appear as a mini-boss or as an extra complication for the final confrontation. Or maybe this vile wizard could be the cause of all of our problems and become some kind of reoccurring villain in our story. It's really up in the air, but I had the idea, so I wrote it down. I don't have to figure it out right away. I just need to make a thorough inventory of the ideas and images that I have, and I can edit through them later as these ideas become more specific and seem to talk to each other more closely. Thinking about this baptismal font I have in the front and this, river and waterfalls that I have, wouldn't it be interesting if I had like this magical blessed spring that is up on the rock face that serves as a second entrance into this temple? Then I have this idea for this cavern pool that is feeding the magical spring and that actually could serve as a secret room that connects the spring to the final boss encounter, where you can peer through a tiny crack in the wall and get a sense of what is going on behind there and how long you have to stop the ritual before it's too late. And maybe we could have another passage, maybe it's secret, maybe it's just an eroded crack in the wall that connects the pool to the stature room in the middle of the dungeon. And this will help create those loops and multiple paths through the space. But I think we have gotten as far as we need to in the brainstorming phase. Now we need to start solving specific spatial problems with grid paper. And though there will still be lots of chances to change things and discover new things, our notes page is becoming far too messy at this point to be useful. Now, I don't want to misrepresent this process. I did kind of think about a lot of these ideas ahead of time, but this is the same basic process that I would use. It would just probably take me a little while longer to plan this out as opposed to, with the 8 minutes that it's been so far. And while we're at it, I should also acknowledge that the style of map that we're going for is old school in nature, like the stars for statues and the kind of descending triangles for stairs and that kind of thing. Now, this style has been popularly revitalized by artists like Dyson Logos, who, by the way, has tons of free maps on their own website, and I will leave a link to that in the description below as well. When I am running a game and I don't have the time to like draw an original space, the first website I go to is Dyson Logos to take some of those maps. Anyhow, back to the map, I have this idea that I am going to have this pool room also spill out and erode a path through this temple. And that will help create another entrance and more looping pathways and more opportunities to show this conflict of nature as an active element in this old environment. This tiny river cutting through the dungeon will add an interesting navigational element to the room in the center, while also creating an extra entrance to sneak in through, while also spilling some of the skeletons within the tombs in that long side chamber connecting the middle and the end of our dungeon. To make this location feel vital and changing and alive, like it has a history outside of play, we need to make our conflicts within it, whether it's with nature or with the denizens of the dungeons or with the enemies within, we need to make all of these participants pushy, impolite, constantly elbowing their way into the conversation. Now, this dungeon is pretty tiny, but we have made the space a lot more interesting to explore by adding 3 different entrances that also cut a couple of loops through the front part of this space. Depending on what sparks the curiosity of your players, you will have lots of different ways to approach this and kind of give clues and opportunity for surprise attacks to the beginning of this adventure. So now it's time to make everything look nice with some markers and hatching. Though if I was just prepping a game, I would probably draw out the map on a marker board as we went, and I would actually just write my notes for all of these encounters in each of these chambers just straight on the map itself without bothering to shade in where the walls are and everything. Using 24 pound printer paper with Sharpies works perfectly well for a home game. If you're going to do a commercial commission, you will want to use Bristol board and microns or something of archival quality. Not only will it look nicer, it won't feather as much, and it will also last longer as well, so you can hold on to the originals for a long time. Starting with this bridge, let's go through encounter by encounter and talk about how we are using this map to also design our adventure. I'll have some links to some other videos that I feel have the highest quality of information on how to design encounters and adventures. Now, the first encounter is really important. It's going to set the tone and sign the contract of what the players can expect for the rest of this adventure. So I'm going to put a couple of slaughtered monks bleeding out on this bridge. Maybe one of them is able just to murmur some kind of cryptic message to our adventurers as they pass into the temple, but not too much information. And hey, if we can tempt one of our players to use one of their healing items on this monk, all the better. This will also communicate that the bandits are already inside and they are willing to kill to achieve their goals. Next, we will have the baptismal font in the front room that has been filled in with dirt. This will be an interesting clue for our players to chew on. Why did they take the time to fill this in with dirt? Maybe if we find some holy water, that would be a powerful weapon against our enemies. It also shows that our enemies have some amount of caution and ingenuity that they are applying. They are pushing back against possible threats in this environment. It shows that there is story that is happening here, goals that are being carried out regardless if the players are involved in this or not. And I'm also writing in the notes something else that is very important to these kinds of location-based adventures. What sensory clues can our characters detect from the next room so they can make a decision about what to do there? And in this case, from this room, our characters would be able to hear rushing water and hammering on stone. The sound of water might remind one of the players that, hey, there's a whole stream running out the side of a wall, or there's a spring up to the left of the entrance. Maybe we should go check that out. Maybe it connects. Maybe they've already been there and they can fill in these connections with this bit of sensory clues. The hammering is going to tell them that the enemies are in the next room and they may be distracted in whatever their labors happen to be. Nothing kills the momentum of a dungeon crawl like when the DM says you reach a T-junction. You can go left or you can go right, and you have no extra information. You may as well flip a coin, and that is not a meaningful choice, it is not an engaging choice, and it's really not good game design. In the next chamber, we see the Beastmen absently hammering away at the carvings and frescoes of this chamber. At the rear of the chamber, there are 4 statues. All of them are missing their heads, and the heads are nowhere in sight, perhaps removed to another chamber in the dungeon. Water pours from a crack in the wall and cuts a crevice in the middle of the room. A rickety makeshift bridge has been laid across the crevice. This is a simple and easy little encounter where we are giving the players an opportunity to seize the upper hand. But they have to contend with this crevice. They either have to, risk jumping across it, risk walking across this rickety bridge. They could try attacking at range or luring them into an ambush in the front room, or approaching from one of the other directions available to them. Depending on how the players choose to engage with the situation, you can also have reinforcements rush in from the room off to the upper right, or you could have those same reinforcements exit the eroded corner from the tomb and loop around, starting a pincer maneuver against our players. If our players do in all of their enemies and make their way to the doorway to the upper right of this room, they might hear the clattering of bones and moaning of disquieted souls. Our next chamber will be full of tombs of the honored dead that used to serve the Paladin King that is interred in the final burial chamber. And they are none too happy with their current situation, what with all of the noise and desecration of their holy resting place. Some of their twitching skeletal remains have been dashed on the floor by those who charged through this room, and still others are slowly pulling open their tombs to launch their counterattack against the next target they see, which in this case is the players. This is another pretty simple encounter that can be run lots of different ways. If the players choose to rush through this chamber as quickly as they can to attend to the maniacal chanting and laughter they hear from the chamber beyond, maybe this is just a couple of skill checks to see if they can get through here unscathed, or maybe with some clever role-playing or application of magical items, this could turn into a situation where the players could enlist the help of these skeletons in some way. In any case, we probably just had some kind of fight in this adventure, so I would go to some lengths to avoid having another one immediately afterwards. You want there to be variety not only in the kinds of encounters, but also in what is being risked. So maybe our skeletons have this accursed touch, so any players that try to rush through will get this hex thrown upon them. Or maybe there will just be like some kind of grappling check, and if somebody gets wrapped up in all of these grasping skeleton hands, the other characters will have to rush to their aid. Or maybe the spirits in these old bones have a gaze that withers flame, and the torches begin to burn out. Now, ultimately, the only resources that really matter in adventure games are hit points, but we could kind of jaquaze our way to those hit points. We can find multiple entrances and looping paths to attack that resource through other means, and that will maintain variety and surprise. Taking away light sources or making characters take off their armor to squeeze through tight spaces is a great way to make them more vulnerable to damage and feel that risk of those precious hit points. Our next room is going to be an antechamber before the final boss fight. It is going to be the unattended equipment and notes of our evil wizard. A brief chance to find out what exactly is happening here and how exactly to stop it, and perhaps pilfer some useful equipment for the battle ahead. For they can spy out between the pillars and up the stairs. The grand burial chamber is swirling with dark magics as the chaunt of the evil wizard coaxes the spirit of the paladin king from its final rest and into the bound service to the bandit prince. Now, in the floor of the boss arena, there are 4 mounds of dirt, into which have been placed and buried 4 of the heads from those statues earlier on. That is part of the ritual. And if our players have been paying attention and asking the right questions, perhaps they have surmised that if they dig up these heads, they can put this spirit to rest and rob the bandit king of his prize. Now, this secret little twist to this dark ritual regarding the statue heads would have been easy enough to discover had the players happened to find the secret pool room behind the boss chamber and spied the burying of the heads in the first place through the crack in the wall. Now, if I was running this game, I would not make it mandatory to look through this secret crack to figure out what's going on. I would make sure that in my narration, I would say that there were shovels and these mounds of dirt would be fairly obvious to spy out. But for the players who did find the secret room and did look through the crack, I do think that they would be more likely in future adventures to continue to poke around and be adventurous and curious, because they would have gotten such a great reward. I would also probably put some other kind of, spirit encounter, like a river spirit encounter into this room, some other kind of role-playing opportunity or treasure reward in this pool room as well. Perhaps some legendary weapon has been embedded into the bottom of this surprisingly deep pool. And now we get to this sacred fountain, and this would be a great opportunity to mix in one of our deities or patron saints from our setting into this game, and maybe this statue weeps holy water drop by drop into some kind of vessel that it is already holding. This would put a time constraint on the acquisition of lots and lots of this holy water, so you're not just like trivializing the rest of your encounters in this, but it would also reward people for being curious and engaging with the location. And maybe I am erring on the side of making all of my secrets in my dungeon a good thing, but I find that results in the type of play that I would rather see at my table than overly cautious players who are always flinching about every little new possibility in the game, convinced that by poking around, curiosity is going to kill the cat. And that is basically it. I might try to figure out how to add one more encounter, maybe before you even get to this place. Maybe you meet some wounded monks on the road that are imploring your help when suddenly one of them gets a crossbow bolt in the back and you have to fight some beastmen. Really kick things off with a bang or a strong start, as Mike Shea would say. There are still lots of things to consider and refigure in the notes. The map is probably fine, and it really ought to be since it's in permanent marker now. And here we reach a divergent path. Because if I am designing this dungeon for my home game, then I just have to kind of see how this turns out. There is no way of knowing if a group of, 5 of my cleverest, bestest friends are going to be able to crack this wide open and circumvent all of my clever little traps and machinations and encounters. There's really no way to foresee what they're going to think of, what they're going to do. If this was for commercial release, if this was something that I was, charging money for somebody to buy and run themselves, I would play test this a lot and go back and make revisions and make changes. But as a home game, you really don't have a play test. You just have to try to prepare the best you can and to change things on the fly and react to the situation as best you can. And personally, as a dungeon master, this is what I like. I appreciate the surprises. I enjoy the improvisational nature of the game. And I may as well enjoy it because there's no way around it. There is no book or process or video or individual that can insulate all possibilities of things going off the beaten path, of things throwing a monkey wrench into your plans. So yeah, you may as well get comfortable with that idea and learn to love it. This is why I find it so important and rewarding to plan my encounters as situations that could go many ways, as opposed to a specific story beat or linchpin to the story without which the whole evening's fun would be destroyed. As the GM, I bring the situations, and together the story emerges from what happens when everybody's at the table together. It's not something that I like to plan ahead of time. In any case, it is past time for this episode to come to a close. I didn't realize it was going to be quite this long when I set out to do this, but I'm really happy with what we have here, and it gives me some ideas for things I might want to put into a zine later on. If you heard something useful in the middle of all this yammering, please let me know in the comments below, or let me know what books or resources or videos you are looking at that help you get your creative motor turning. If you want more of this sort of thing, then please hit that subscribe button or check out my podcast, Splatbook, that comes out every other Thursday, and I record that with my friend John Corey. If you want to support the show, you can subscribe to my Patreon or stop by the MapCrow merch store and pick up some zines and maps for yourself. And I will have links to all of those things and some of the books and videos I've mentioned before in the description below. So until next time, my friends, farewell. Hey, welcome to the Aftercrow. I want to again thank all of my patrons who have shown an enormous and generous support for the show. A big reason that I am able to get the merch store up and running again and start putting out zines is because, because of the Patreon support, I have the upfront cash that I need to pay for printing and cover shipping and all of that good stuff. And also keep merchandise stocked for future purchases and buy overstock that I can then take to conventions. Amber and I have a booth at Gen Con in a couple of weeks. It's in their new Maker's Market area. I'm not quite sure I know where that is, but more information will follow as soon as I find out. And if you're still watching this video, I want to thank you and also ask you what you think of these longer videos. Do you think I am rushing through some of my shorter videos to get through a subject in 12 minutes when I should be spending more close to a half hour or an hour on something? Let me know, please, in the comments. I have recently been looking at some of my earlier videos and thinking that, the audio quality and the video quality isn't really where the channel is right now, and maybe revisiting some of those older topics might be a good thing to explore in the future of this channel. Whatever the case, I will see you next time.